This is the third in a series of scholar-in-residence programs, and the first two were about women in government. And we had elected officials, from a Congresswoman to a State Assemblywoman to a state senator, also a woman. And so today we're shifting gears, and we're going to be talking about aging in an urban environment. And why is it that there's such an increase, and I'll give you some facts and figures in a moment, about the reverse migration. There are so many seniors who have left the city for a variety of reasons, or who never even lived in New York City or similar cities, and are now moving back. What attracts them? What do we have in a city, in an urban area, that is inducive to seniors and contribute to their quality of life? And to speak about that are my two guests who are so knowledgeable. And I want to get the bios wrong, so let me start my extreme left and so, right? Dr. Joan Pastore, who is the director of AMICO, the 59th Street Senior Citizen Center, which has a large population of people that go there. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a very large center. It's a mixed population. We're starting to see a big Asian population in the area. So it's a mixture of long-time Brooklyn residents, Italian Americans, Jewish, but now we're beginning to see Chinese as well as some folks from Vietnam and all over the world, really.
Yeah, which is a way of saying also that all of the services and many of the features of the city really we have a multi-ethnic population, and we have a diversity of languages as well. And Dr. Joan Pastore also is the oversight director at the Eileen C. Dugan Center, which is on Court Street, not very far from here. Obviously, they're both in Brooklyn. Welcome, ladies. She is also a clinical assistant professor at the Stony Brook School of Social Work in Manhattan and an adjunct professor at the New York School, NYU Silver School of Social Work. She was recently appointed to the Age-Friendly, I love this title, the Age-Friendly Commission at the New York Academy of Medicine, and maybe she'll have a chance to tell us what exactly that means. She sits on the Bioethics Committee and Institutional Review Board for Research at Maimonides Hospital, another Brooklyn institution. And she is a past member of Community Board 12, which serves Dyker Heights, the southern part of Brooklyn. So we have a representative who's knowledgeable about senior issues in the southern part of Brooklyn, and now I can turn to somebody who's very knowledgeable, not only about that, but also concentration more, I think, on the northern part of Brooklyn, right? And this is Judy Willig, who is the executive director of Heights and Hills. And you may, even in Brooklyn Heights, if you don't live downtown Brooklyn, seen some of their shuttles that go around, and we'll talk more about that later when we talk about transportation. She's a leader. Well, anyway, she's been the executive director for 29 years. God bless you. God bless you. 29 years, all right?
I was very young when I started. I looked like a lot of you.
And I know her hair color was different, too,
yes,
when she started. I've known Judy a long time. All right, and now Heights and Hill has become one of the largest social service organizations, and they provide all kinds of services, as does AMICO, to older adults and their families, and they serve close to 4,000 individuals every single year. She serves as a member of the board of directors of Live On New York. She's chaired the action committee of Live On New York, which addresses advocacy and policy issues. She's done that for 9 years. She's a member of the, and you'll have to tell me what these initials stand for, FPWA.
Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies.
Okay. Campaign, that's the Campaign for Successful Aging Leadership Council, a member of the steering committee of the NYC Elder Abuse Center. She's also a member of the Adult Protection Services Community Advisory Board and a founding member of the New York City Family Caregiver Coalition and the New York City Hoarding Task Force, which is a whole interesting issue, and Judy and I worked very closely together on that issue and others. She's a published author. She's also a frequent speaker at citywide, state, national conferences on topics related to aging, which go on and on. She received her master's in social work from the University of Michigan and a bachelor from Binghamton. So we have some New York, right? And we have connections from both. So let me sit down and pose, give you some data, which I think is important. And I looked up a Queens College study that showed that between 2009 and 2013, which is not that long ago, really, that 1.2% of New Yorkers, 1.2% of New Yorkers aged 62 and older are moving back to New York City. The study didn't say exactly where all of them are coming from, but when you see it's a city of over 8 million people, 1.2% doesn't sound like a lot. It's a lot of individuals. And so the question we're posing to our guests, and hopefully there'll be some time for Q&A from you, will be why? Why are they coming back? What does the city offer them that they're not getting where they live now? Is it family? Is it services? Is it amenities? Exactly what's the draw? And so I think what we'll do is, we know that lots of seniors, when they retire, they move to warmer climates. They move to climates and communities and states where there's a lower tax burden, like Florida, like Arizona. We could quote a couple of other states, mention them. And then they live there, and then at some point, as they begin well into the aging process, there's a movement to come back, and there are several factors that lead to that movement. So, and one of the things that I noticed when I was in the New York State Assembly, I ended my career there as being chair of the Aging Committee, and I did that for a couple of years. And so we looked at some of the programs that New York State, not the city, but the state as a whole, offers to seniors. And we'll talk about that again later on this morning and into the afternoon. But it's also interesting that if you compare and contrast what the city of New York offers to seniors, I mean, I can't speak knowledgeably about what Buffalo offers seniors because I really don't know, or what some city in another state offers. But when we talk about, and these are two very knowledgeable guests we have, about all the specialized programs. I mean, we can even bring it down right here. Look at St. Francis. I know that St. Francis offers seniors senior swim classes, right? It's only open to seniors. They have senior yoga, and I may be missing something else. Tai Chi classes, thank you, Alice mentioned that to me. Lectures and writings, and I remember coming here one time to see a senior art show, where there were pieces of artwork, oils, pastels that seniors had done at some part of a program. St. Francis is very good about doing that, but other institutions in New York City, both private and public, also offer specialized programs just for seniors. So why don't we start with one of the things that I've noticed in New York City is the transportation, and that's a very crucial thing for seniors. If you're a senior and if you're a young couple and you move out to the suburbs and you buy a house and you raise your family and years go by and now you're a senior and one of your partners passes away and now very often that turns out to be the woman is left behind, and women have a longer, in this state at least, we live longer. And now you're in this suburban community and you don't really like driving by yourself at night. And you're not so comfortable driving during the day. That could happen as well. So what is it about the city and what kind of transportation services does a city the size of New York offer, particularly both private and public, to provide that mode of transportation to seniors? Because otherwise they get very isolated. They're home and they're by themselves and they're not in areas where it's easy to walk for anything. You can't walk to the supermarket, you can't walk to a senior center, you can't walk to anything. In fact, a lot of, if you know the suburbs at all, right, you're nodding, you do know, right? They're not even sidewalks, so they don't encourage people to walk. They expect that everybody's going to get into a car and drive wherever they need to go. So why don't we start with you, Judy?
Okay. Can I back up?
Absolutely.
And
go forward, whatever you want.
Okay. Since we're talking about transportation, I can first reverse and then hit the accelerator. Okay. I'm not sure I entirely agree that New York is so age-friendly. And I think the place to begin with that is to look at what are we talking about when we talk about aging. For federal purposes, to be eligible for federal benefits, Medicare for instance, arbitrarily the number was 65. That got set back in 1965, I think. 65, you know what, back when I was young, there was a phrase that was, don't trust anybody over 30, right? Have any of you ever heard of that? Well, when I was growing up, that was like the mantra of, you know, all the hippies who, you must have read about hippies in history class, yes? No? The mantra was, don't trust anyone over 30. Well, and then a lot of those baby boomers turned 30. And 30 wasn't so old anymore. And then 40 wasn't so old. And I remember seeing pictures of my grandmother when she was 60, and she really looked like a very old woman. Well, when I turned 60, and that's in my rear view mirror, 60 didn't seem very old to me at all, yet there are certain things that I'm eligible for because of that number. But I also have a mother who's 92. And it's pretty strange to think that we're both eligible for the same services. My mother is 92, and her memory is better than mine, but physically she has some challenges. But when we talk about services and we talk about people coming back, we're talking about an age span of essentially what's becoming 50 years, between 60 and we serve people who are over 100. And there's a huge difference between people who are 60 and people who are 90. And to paint all aging with a broad stroke, I think creates something that's not quite true. So New York is a great place if you are in that earlier cohort, if you are a young old person, somebody who's newly retired, because look at what you have in New York. You've got museums that have senior rates. You have half fare on our buses and our subways, which is terrific. We have Accessoride, which I'll get to in a minute, which sounds like a great program. In practice, in reality, it's something different. But we have a lot of, coming to St. Francis to take classes, going swimming is a great thing. When you're 80, 85, not so much. Now, certainly there are some who at 85, at 90 are still going strong and coming to classes and doing things. But somewhere around, and in our aging world, we tend to look at 85 as sort of the average kind of cutoff when things start to get much harder. So some of that coming back to New York, there are many reasons. Some is because family is here. As people get much older, they gravitate towards family. Family wants to be near the older person, and if they are originally from New York, it's a great place to come back to if you have supports here. As Joan said, we have a system of services here, as New York has a tradition of way back. If you look at the number of settlement houses in New York City, New York has a tradition way before government of providing supports for those in need. So there is a wonderful network, and Joan runs an organization, I run an organization. There's a very rich history of supportive services, which makes New York a better place to age than a lot of others. And certainly that whole issue of driving is a good example. The problem is that when you hit 85, going up and down all those subway steps is not so easy anymore. So you'll notice you have a lot more older people taking buses because it's a lot easier to navigate on a bus. But we also have, and my organization is one of them, we have a system of nonprofits that provide transportation to more frail older adults. Now, Access-a-Ride is New York City's program to address those who can't use public transportation. And I think there's a federal mandate that every jurisdiction has to have that, so that every city, and I guess every town, has to have some sort of a paratransit system. New York is huge. And the paratransit system we have in New York City is Access-a-Ride. Does anybody here use Access-a-Ride? Okay, the nickname for Access-a-Ride amongst my people is Stress-a-Ride. Because it's pretty involved to be deemed eligible. You have to go there, you have to walk up steps to show them that you can't walk steps, you have to qualify. And then once you do all of that, it's pretty stressful in that you have to call them a day in advance and hope that they come on time, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, there's a lot of calling back and forth. And the other thing that's very difficult is they don't always agree to pick you up, to take you home. So if you have a doctor's appointment, you can take Access-a-Ride to the doctor, and that usually works pretty well. But when you go to the doctor, do you know exactly what time you're going to be done? And the Access-a-Ride system isn't really built for that. So you're supposed to call them when you're done. But you could wind up waiting an hour and a half. Sometimes they get lost. Sometimes they don't show up.
And sometimes they'll make another stop in another borough.
Oh, that's the other thing is...
Because the routes are not very well defined.
You've seen those big Access-a-Ride vans. So sometimes they will take 3 people, and so it's not a direct route home. Now, there are other cities that do have systems where they use vouchers for car service. And I believe New York City, somebody has introduced that idea, and it's being tested out in Queens. But the good news about New York, and we'll probably get to this, is that there is a network of nonprofits out there, largely funded through government, that provides services for, and again, it's really difficult to target a 50-year age span. So most organizations sort of specialize, if you will, in...
I know at AMICO, I'm there a long time too, and I've seen the population totally turn over, and what Judy mentions is true. You do have folks that are 85 plus, they're older, they're frailer, their needs are very different than a 60-year-old, and so we are working, and
right.
It's not unusual, unfortunately, have a mother or daughter,
right.
and actually see second generation of older folks. So they are very different. And like Judy said, age 85, that seems to be the point where they really start to need services for basic care, whether it's assistance with walking, assistance with transportation, as they get older, frailer, maybe assistance with personal care, feeding, toileting, etc.
Or even simply doing your laundry.
Yeah. Yeah, I do find, Joan, to get back to your point, I've had many of folks, the trend seemed to be everyone was moving to Jersey with their kids, or Staten Island with their kids, or Florida, like you said, and we did have a lot of seniors return because they did not like it.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yes, they came back because they lost a spouse and they were too isolated, but oftentimes they came back because they were used to the city. And they just were too isolated. I actually had one man, God bless him, he was 90 years old. He made his son drive him back to Brooklyn every day from Jersey. Drove his kids crazy, but it was the isolation and the lack of services, the lack of transportation. But what we're finding is a lot of folks who are new immigrants are very much attracted to New York as opposed to another state, because we are a sanctuary city and we do provide services. So we see a lot of folks, older folks, who are very new to New York City, anywhere from 6 months to 30 years, falling in that new immigrant status. And it gets even more difficult trying to serve 2 different generations. And then you have so many people from so many different diverse backgrounds that their needs are really so different, and their values are so different. So it actually makes for a pretty interesting mix, but it can be difficult when you put it all together and to try to cater to individual needs and get to know people and have a staff that's culturally competent.
And also, you touched on this, and the centers that I represented when I was in the Assembly, there was one in Brooklyn Heights on Pierpont Street, one on Court Street, which you are very involved in now, that's the Dugan Center, and another one on Atlantic Avenue. And while they all are funded by the city,
Yes.
I know they all have city contracts, and they get other support from, there's some private support, and there may be some other city council support. I don't know how all the funding works, but I can tell you that they're all very different.
Yes.
They all, they're all very different, and they cater to the needs of that community that they serve. So where some centers, and these ladies know, I mean, I can speak about 3, but you have a broader experience here, that some centers cater to the older senior, all right? The senior that I think that Judy was referencing before. So they have more programs that are more sedentary. They do calisthenics in a chair, right? They bring in instructors, and the seniors will sit on a chair, and they will do whatever it is they're capable of doing. They'll have more card games, more bingo, more where other centers take people on trips. They go all over the place. There'll be a bus, and you sign up, and they will take you to Manhattan. They go to places in Jersey. They travel all over. They're day trips. Not every senior can do that.
Right.
And then there are other centers that offer very good programming. There was a center that I spent a lot of time at, where they had gotten a city grant from a city council person. They bought a lot of computers, they hired a teacher,
right.
And they were training seniors on how to use the computer. And they had a, 6-8 week section, and then afterwards, everybody who graduated got a flash drive, they got a diploma, and then they could come back to that center anytime they wanted, and as long as the computer wasn't being used by a student in the next round of class, they could use it. So you had seniors who were communicating, Skyping, they were doing everything that you guys do, right? And they were doing it with children, grandchildren, all over the world, which was a remarkable thing. They didn't have the access to a computer in their own house, but they did have it at the center. But not all centers offer that.
These days, most of them do. In fact, DFTA requires a certain amount of technology units.
Good. Yeah. Good to hear.
So, yeah, I think the bottom line here is there is no one size fits all. There was an article in the Times last week. I don't know if anybody saw this, but it was titled something about poor older people. Wealthy older people tend to live longer than poorer older people. But that discrepancy is not as large in New York City. And the article attributes it to several things. One of them being actually being the influx of immigrant populations. And immigrants tend to be healthier on the whole than Americans. That whole American obesity thing is
Well, a certain generation within the older.
yes, yes. And that they tend to live longer. But the other things, and it contradicts the theory that it's just about access to health care. And the truth is, in New York City, while there are communities that have difficulty accessing health care, we have more health care per capita in New York City than anywhere else. I mean, we've got, yes, Brooklyn is losing hospitals, but we still have more hospitals than people who live in rural parts of the country. But the other thing that it's attributed to is New York has, along with there's one other state that has the highest taxes on cigarettes. So cigarette smoking has become very much a thing of the past. The elimination of trans fats has helped. These are the illnesses that cause, or these are the causes of heart disease and stroke, and so poorer people in New York are benefiting from some of the things that in other parts of the country are only there for the wealthy.
And another thing that attributes to that, we talked about transportation and the fact that there are subways that are accessible, the buses are accessible. when the act to provide services for people with disabilities was passed, New York City got a variance, all right, because they said they couldn't financially convert all of the subways where so that they would be accessible. And they applied the federal government, and that's what they got. So if you live in a neighborhood, you probably will have to look for an accessible subway. In Brooklyn Heights, we have a lot of subways that have elevators and escalators, but then you get to stairs. So you can't use it. It's not accessible for you. You go to Bay Ridge, also, there's steep steps, and there's no way you can, that's why the buses have become so important.
Well, we've been working with, so Heights and Hills, which is my organization, took over management of a senior center in Park Slope this July. And it's on 7th Avenue and 7th Street in the Slope. And we've been working with Councilmember Brad Lander because the 9th Street subway station is not accessible. And many of the members of our center come from all over, and they can't navigate the stairs. And every time he talks about participatory budgeting, the issue of an elevator for the 9th Street subway comes up. The problem is that the access to the subway is under homes. You enter on the corners, but the access to the subway is right in the middle of the block. So the cost of doing that is way beyond what participatory budgeting can handle. But it's certainly something that's being talked about because it's a huge barrier.
And you're talking about 9th and 4th Avenue?
No, 9th and 7th, 8th Avenue.
7th and 8th Avenue. The steepest station in the entire city is the one on 9th, Smith and 9th. Smith and 9th. That's the steepest subway. And they recently went under, and I don't know how many millions of dollars it cost to renovate it. And when they were doing it, the elected officials all asked for accessibility, and they couldn't do it, or they wouldn't do it. Like, beautiful escalators, but they only go so far, and then you're left with steps. So it doesn't do somebody who can't navigate steps.
So the theory is Accessoride will fill in, but it doesn't.
But it doesn't, no, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. So I want to get back to one of the other things. I talked and touched on it a little bit about the walk. I think one of the reasons that I don't know if it was in that article, I don't remember, but one of the reasons that makes New Yorkers healthier is it's a walking city. You know, people walk all the time. I had a landlady years ago where my office was on Smith Street who had 2 children, 2 grown children, 2 sons. One lived in Brooklyn and one lived in New Jersey. And she didn't like visiting the son in New Jersey. Not that she didn't love him equally. That wasn't the issue. What the issue was, she would go out to Jersey, and she said the husband went to work, the wife went to work, her 2 granddaughters went off to school, and she was sitting by herself on a lawn chair, on a lawn, in front of the house, and never saw anybody else. She said to me, even the letter carrier doesn't get out of, they pass by, and they just put the mail in the mailbox at the end of the driveway. I mean, he would wave to her, but that's not a conversation. So she felt more isolated. Where she lived on Smith Street, she could look out her window and there was constant people walking back and forth. She lived across the street from a school. She watched the kids. She had a friend. They would go on the bus and go downtown Brooklyn. They would go to a movie, or maybe they would go to Macy's to shop, or maybe whatever they did, they would walk to places in the neighborhood. And so walkability, I think, is a big feature of cities. And we have the city administration, prior Bloomberg and again de Blasio's administration, when people redo stores or they put up new stores, a big push to have street furniture. And that's good for everybody. You know, a bench outside, because even if you're a mom with a baby carriage, you may need to sit down, and our streets in the past, there's no opportunity to do that. But now if you look around at some of the commercial strips, you can count the number of chairs or benches that they have placed. And none of the storekeepers that I ever spoke to found that as a detriment.
You know, it's funny, I had a conversation with Marty Markowitz about that years ago, about putting more benches on commercial corridors. And it wasn't that many years ago. Maybe it was 7 or 8 years ago. And his first response was, can't do that, homeless people sleep on the benches. Yet
Yeah.
And I think that was a problem. That was certainly a problem in the 70s and in the 80s, but that's less of a problem now. And there's also street furniture now that can be created. You know, you see the ones with the arms in between the seats that are less conducive to people lying down and sleeping on them, but meet the needs of people who have to stop and rest. So I do think that's a win.
You were going to say, Joe?
Similar to what Judy said, we wanted to put them, and we were discouraged as well by the community board because of the homelessness and people sleeping there, and it was inviting crime. I do agree, though, in front of shops, it's very, very helpful along the busy strip like Court Street or Smith Street. To get back to what we originally started talking about, I think a lot of folks, older folks, stay in New York City and come to New York City because of the whole continuum of services that we have. You know, starting with someone who's 60, and wants to go to the theater and Central Park, all the ways, you know, up until 100, and there, it's each step of the way we have services for folks, and we can keep tailoring it. So I think that's one of the important reasons of why. And also, I want to stress with senior centers, and I don't know if any of you are going to work in senior centers or been to senior centers. Overall, why senior centers came into being was to create a sense of community for older folks. The meals were secondary, but it was to create a sense of community. And I think in that respect, they are very successful. It gives people a sense of purpose, a place to go. You know, baseline, what we try to do with people in senior centers is at least keep them at their present level of functioning. Let's not let them slip down because they're depressed and they're isolated and they don't feel a sense of purpose. Now, if we can keep them connected and we keep them going strong, that's great. But then, once we reach that point, what we want to really do then is let there be a chapter 2 for them, because age 60 is very young. And oftentimes, you know, you have somebody who retired and they spent their life working hard, you know, taking care of their family, taking care of their home, and for the first time in their lives, they have a little bit of freedom. So that if they do come to the center and they're in relatively good health, we want them to help them develop a side of themselves that maybe they didn't have the time and energy for when they were younger. And it's wonderful to see when you see people, an older person who can really blossom and take on a new role. And, you know, then as a person gets older, frailer, there are different services that they can have. And that's when Judy comes in a lot of times, where we can work hand in hand. But it's what I really want to stress to people, and hopefully a lot of you are going to work with older people. It can be a lot of fun. It really can be. Sometimes people have such a negative stereotype about older adults that, you know, they're old, they're frail, they live in a nursing home. And what is it, 5%?
5%. And you know what? When I started my career 30 plus years ago, you know how many people were living in nursing homes?
How many?
5%.
Okay.
So 30 years later,
Still the same
it's still the same. How many people in this room, raise your hand, want to age in a nursing home? Nobody. You know what? AARP spent a ton of money to do a study to show that 90-some-odd% of people want to age within their own home and their own community. There's also, I don't know if you saw this, I was at a national conference last month, and there was a study that showed that connectedness, social connectedness, has more of an impact on health than smoking cessation. So it is more important, and I can't support what you're saying enough. Yeah. It is more important for older people to stay connected to one another, to the community, to the election. You know, my mom lives in an assisted living facility, and we just fought with them there to make sure that everybody in the assisted living facility can vote. Because you want, the best thing for older people is to be able to stay connected. I also want to, you keep talking about those of you in the room who are going to go into working with older people. And I got news for you. The population of older people is growing. I just saw a graph that shows that, I think it's in 2025 across the world, that's the intersection where the number of people over 65 starts overtaking the number of people under 5. And then it just skyrockets.
Yeah.
At some point, 25% of the US population is going to be over the age of 60. So those of you who are going into public health careers, there's a huge need for people, professionals, who can prepare our society for dealing with this growth.
Yeah. It used to be.
You know, Joan, before you start, I wanted to just pause because I wanted to welcome our Assemblywoman for the area who's joined us today, Joanne Simon. Thank you for being here, Joanne. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Joan.
To pick up on what Judy was saying, it used to be called the graying of America. Then it turned into the global graying. Now we're up to aging tsunami. So absolutely, absolutely. So jobs, jobs, jobs. You picked a good field at a good time to go into, and hopefully a lot of you will go into the field of aging. We know him. Yeah. The other thing is, you know, you can be interested in the field of aging, and there's so many different career opportunities for you. You can go into nursing, you can go into social work, you can certainly go into medical, but there's so many other subspecialties as well where they really specialize.
But they have to pay more. There are many careers in aging, you know, because it's that they need to, I feel strongly about it, need to increase the pay.
Oh, because you get no arguments from us.
I know. Well, because there are fields certainly where you go. I was just very struck by the schools of social work in our city that don't offer any kind of specialized programming. They don't have coursework.
Hunter does.
Hunter does, yeah, but some of the others don't. And we wrote letters to some of them saying you ought to offer coursework because as the population ages, there will be more opportunities for jobs, but people are going to have to, and that's a difficult field. People want to be, they want to work with babies in hospitals.
So here's the flip side of that, which is...
See, we're all connected, right,
advocacy, advocacy and policy.
Yeah.
I started out doing clinical work and, you know, working one-on-one with people, and came to the conclusion that if we don't start addressing some of these issues on a policy level, in 25 years, we're going to be in really bad shape, because starting today, baby boomers this year started turning 75. Remember what I said before? 85 is where people start to need services. So 10 years from now, there's going to be an influx of older people who need supports and services. And have you heard any of the candidates talk about it? Education, education, education. Well, we need to start educating people around the needs of older people, because it's going to become a huge problem if we don't start looking at it now. So again, I invite you all to get involved, to start looking towards the future, because it's also where the jobs are going to be.
And that spectrum of jobs goes from one end to the other.
But we also have to fight to, I mean, people who work in the aging field make less money than people who work in other fields. And on a policy and an advocacy level, we're starting to talk about that. There's a whole movement right now on a city level, because we've looked at, you know, with the mayor's Mental Health Thrive New York, they're hiring people at $20,000 a year higher than what the community-based organizations are able to pay based on what the city gives us. So we're starting to talk about that publicly, that the city has to start recognizing that there's an older segment of the population, and that the city needs to be able to fund professional services and to hire the best and the brightest.
I want to ask Joan a question and then skip through some other things that are not only citywide, but how the state recognizes the need of seniors, because the state has been very active as well. So your funding, how do your centers get funded? Who pays for it?
New York City Department for the Aging.
Mm-hmm.
Some centers may or may not get some funding through State Office for the Aging, which is SOFA.
Yes.
I know about a year or two ago, I guess 3 years ago now, the governor did come up with a policy of managed long-term care, and he did start designing some policies with the needs of older, frailer folks in mind. And
that's specifically for low income, for people on Medicaid.
Yes, there are some other supplementary programs for people who are borderline. That's a 5-year program. So there's been a lot of issues with it, as you know, but they are starting to do some long-term planning for the older, frail population. And the overall idea was, let's keep this population as home and independent as possible in the community as long as possible by giving support services, as opposed to prematurely throwing someone in a nursing home because they don't know what else to do with them, which has happened before in the past. There have been a lot of issues with that, but it's a very much a step in the right direction. So, and I believe your organization that you sit on the board of directors, they have in front of the state right now, the state legislator, a very big grant for, what is it, $88 million? Something like that.
The ask is for 200 million.
200 million, okay. Okay, so there is some thinking about
I
it.
don't think you're getting $200 million.
No,
but you
if
ask.
we get 5.
Right, you ask. And then if you get 5, you're really happy, you think you're
No. If you get 5,
No?
you ask for 10.
You ask for 10, okay, all right, okay. But something that Joan just touched on, which is, and we have to see how it turns out. We know that in a lot of cases, and it's something the state did, which was, is a program, you have to keep seniors, if you want to keep seniors out of nursing homes, right, you have to keep them home.
Right.
And then you have to provide the services at home, which is something that Judy does. But the thing that I want to talk about, just briefly, is the fact that how do we either build more housing for seniors that's affordable?
That's critical.
That's a critical.
That's the
and then,
elephant in the room.
And then seniors who are living at home, what the state did a couple of years ago, and I was very proud of this raise. We had a program in New York City called SCREE, which is advantageous to low-income seniors who, when the landlord increases the rent, the senior, if they are at a certain, and it was $30,000 at the time for a couple, which that's like nothing. And then there's an application form, and what happens is that the landlord doesn't get the raise from the couple living in the apartment or the individual living in the apartment. They get it back in reduced real estate taxes. In other words, the city is giving up those taxes and passing it on, so it's a win for the landlord. He doesn't have to pay the extra tax, you know, and it's a win for the senior because the senior can stay at home, because that's one of the things that has contributed across the board to homelessness in the city. The rent goes up, and if you live in Brooklyn, you live in Queens, you live in Manhattan, wherever you live in this city, you know that's a constant problem. But if you're living on a fixed income that seniors are, then you really live in fear. Every 2 years your rent's going to go up because you don't own your place, and then how are you going to make that extra money? Where are you going to find it? So a couple of years ago, what we did in the state is we increased that limit to $50,000 for a couple, which was a $20,000, but it captured a lot of people who were just over, they made 32, that's not a lot of money, they made 30, that was their income for the year. Remember, as you said, people retired much earlier, years and years ago, and so many of them have pensions based on their last couple of years of salary, which were much lower. Their Social Security is based on their much lower. So their fixed incomes are much lower than when you guys hopefully retire, the bulk of you. You will be getting more hopefully in those because you have a larger income. And as we said earlier, many often what happens is the female partner survives, and she has lower earning ability. So she's on a much less, her fixed income is much less than a man's because she may not have worked as many years as the man did, took time out. Family care, child care, whatever it was, caring for older, a parent falls on the woman in the household. So her income is going to be lower. So anything that we can do to ensure that there's housing for seniors, right? And that's a big issue.
That's the heaviest lift.
And this mayor's program now talks about, and I don't know how it's going to flesh out, but about putting in place some more solid programs for senior housing. And each time a developer wants to go in and build up or out, that there has to be senior housing in place, because that keeps seniors connected, as Joan said before. They can then be in a neighborhood that they know, that they can walk for services, they can walk to the fruit store or to the whatever it is that's there and meet other seniors, they can go to the center.
Yeah.
And that keeps them all together, and it keeps them healthier and living longer.
So some of the other support, we keep talking about support services, so very quickly and specifically, some of the support services are, for homebound folks, are case management, where case managers go into the home and work with the older person and whoever they define as family to make sure they have all the things they need to age safely in their home. We also operate a caregiver support program where we provide supports to the family members who are doing the caregiving. So we run support groups, we do educational programs. I think we have something coming up on, if we didn't just do it, on some of the kinds of equipment that's out there that can be purchased for someone who is homebound. Transportation, we talked about senior centers. Home delivered meals is a huge support for people who are living in their home and can no longer get out to shop or can't stand long enough to cook. And the way to access that is through a case management program, and every community has a case management program that covers their area. My organization, Heights and Hills, serves 1/3 of Brooklyn. So we are the people who, the thinking behind it is, if you are frail enough to need to have a meal delivered to you every day, then you probably have other needs as well. So a case manager goes into the home and takes a look at and makes recommendations on what might make your life safer. And to age successfully in the community, there are essentially 5 or 6 different things that you need. And we talked about some of them. One is enough money to pay your bills, right? So there are 2 ways to deal with that, either getting more income or reducing your expenses. And there are many programs out there like food stamps, like SCREE, like Medicaid to help with medical costs. There are all kinds of entitlements and benefits that older people can have access to. Then you want income security, you want food security. Everybody needs to have enough food and nutrition. That's where Meals on Wheels comes in. You need safe, accessible, and affordable housing, which is what Joan just mentioned. You need,
Access to health care.
Access to health care, thank you. Which we talked about the fact that there's health care all over this city, but if you can't get there, or if you're too forgetful to keep appointments, that's a problem. The other thing is social isolation, or as we talked about, connectedness. And there are programs. Heights and Hills runs a program for our homebound clients where we match volunteers to go into the person's home weekly and visit with them. Sometimes it means playing Scrabble once a week. Sometimes it's reading the mail. Sometimes it's watching TV together or watching a movie together. Sometimes it's going out for a walk in the park, depending on the ability of the person. But we try to do that with volunteers in each of the communities that we serve as a way of, again, staying in the community. And there are networks like this throughout the city that provide this continuum of services to try and keep people in their homes.
There was an interesting fight in Albany a couple of years ago because the city administration wanted to have standardized Meals on Wheels. In other words, every Monday, everybody who was on that program was going to get meatloaf. And on Tuesday, they were going to get chicken, and on Wednesday, whatever it was. And they would get the meals, frozen meals, on Monday for the whole week. And then it was incumbent on the senior to freeze them, remember to take them out, remember to put them in the microwave or the oven, whatever they did. And so we were able to successfully argue against that, because one of the things that Meals on Wheels does is provide that communication. That person who delivers that meal knows when Mrs. Smith in apartment 4C doesn't answer the door that there's a problem, because she's not going to go out. And I can see from the movement that we've exhausted our time. And there's more to talk about this, but we thank you very much for joining us today.